are listening to the Voices of ACM-W, stories behind our work, where we have reflective conversations with women shaping computing and technology in our global communities. Hello, I'm Chidam Shengut. I am a reader in computer science at Brunel University of London. I'm excited to welcome you to the first episode of the ACM-W Voices series. This episode is part of ACM-W's Black History Month program, and the conversation focuses on lived experience and community building in technical spaces. We're here to create a space for reflection, care, and shared insight. With me on this journey is my first guest, Audrey Mbogho, a machine learning researcher, educator, and community builder whose work spans academia, language technologies, and women's computing communities across Africa. Audrey, could you tell our audience a bit about yourself today?
Yes, thank you so much, Chidam. So you've been already informed of my name. My name is Audrey Mbogho. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, at United States International University, Africa. So I'm an associate professor of machine learning, a researcher in the same field. And outside of that, I'm involved with the celebration of women in computing in Africa. And I'm also the chair of the chapter here of the ACM-W.
Wonderful. While looking at your CV, I've seen that you've worked and lived across different countries and academic systems. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How has that shaped your understanding of inclusion and belonging in computing communities?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, I have lived in the United States, in New York City. I studied there, I worked there. And then from there, I went to South Africa. I was based in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town. I was there for about a decade, and I'm originally from Kenya. So after that, I returned to Kenya. So I've been exposed to a multitude of cultures, different kinds of people, different attitudes, different experiences. And so that has obviously exposed me to what people are like and increase my ability to tolerate differences in people and to appreciate, not just tolerate, but to appreciate and to celebrate differences in people. Yes.
That is lovely. Are there any particular people or communities that shaped your experiences, especially the way that you contribute to technical spaces?
Yes, absolutely. I think living in New York probably did that the most because, the academic culture there is very vibrant. And I remember being involved with an ACM chapter as an undergraduate student. So I became aware very early on about how you can contribute to technical spaces and through volunteer work. That's not something that is common elsewhere. So my foundation was great in that way, and I've continued to grow in terms of my contributions, my volunteerism throughout my career.
Excellent. Yes. I have similar experience. Only when I moved to United States, I started to become more included in women in computing initiatives, and from then on, I never stopped. So it was a good start, but even though I moved countries and out of United States, I found opportunities as you did, and you're creating your own opportunities now in where you are. So I'm so glad that you continued being involved in ACM-W activities. In your opinion, because we discuss this a lot, we discuss this about women in computing, inclusion in computing. What are your lived experiences about inclusion? Exclusion sometimes in technical spaces is very subtle rather than explicit.
Yes.
How do you navigate those challenges when they appear?
Yes. Yeah. So definitely I have experienced exclusion, especially when it comes to the academic arena. It's quite competitive. People are looking for grants. People are looking for the really good students to supervise. So there's this whole ecosystem. You want to get the best people in your team. You want to get the best students. You want to get the best people to write grant proposals with. And when there's not people that don't know you, they may not pick you because they don't know what you're capable of. So I have felt excluded early on in my career, especially. But I mean, it goes on, it goes on because no one really knows you that well. I've felt excluded at times. Of course, there are times when people call on you and say, hey, can you do this with us? But there's always going to be that. I feel like it's similar to how people in Hollywood are never fully employed. They're always looking for a job. Do a good movie. That doesn't mean that they will pick you next year. Yeah, so you're always, on tenterhooks. Yes.
That's a good analogy. I'd never thought academic life equivalent to Hollywood, but yeah, it's a very good analogy. So it's a tough life as an academic. And then there is sometimes bias as well. And it may not be overt, but it might be deeply ingrained. We've seen studies, for example, that explained how women academics might be getting different type of feedback than academics who are male. And students are looking for different characteristics, and we are not evaluated in the same way when we lecture, when we assess students, when we run courses. So there is definitely a bias that's ingrained in the way that we work as women academics. Do you see examples of this in your everyday academic or professional experiences?
Yes, absolutely. For example, students will pick a supervisor. Let's say it's a master's student or a PhD student. And maybe this is a student who has really enjoyed my course. Maybe I've taught them Introduction to Machine Learning and they loved it. It's the first time they, you know, encountered this topic and they're all excited. They decide to work in that area to do their research in that area, but they don't come to me to supervise. They go to someone else. And so that has happened over and over and over again. They will go to a man, to a male professor for supervision, even if he's not as strong in the subject as I am. But that's an experience that I've had again and again and again. And, I've become used to it. I know that I will get the one student who wants me to supervise him or her. So I've made peace with it.
Definitely. I sometimes think how to mentor young women academics into the field and what advice and recommendations would work for them. If you were to give advice to people who were working in your university or starting new in academia, what would you say to them?
Some things there's really nothing you can do about. You can't change how people perceive you or what people decide to do with you. If they decide to push you aside and go with someone else, when it comes to, let's say, writing project proposals, you can't really control what people do, but you can control how you present yourself. So I think the best approach is to be the best that you can be in your field. And eventually it will show. And there will be people, not everyone, but there will be people who will come and say, hey, I want to work with you. I recognize your excellence and I want to work with you. And that is, I'm speaking from experience. That's been the case. There has been a lot of rejection in my life, but there have been some great opportunities. I think you've seen in my CV, I've worked with people. So, someone does come along who says, I want to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, what has worked was mostly trying to inject what I do, a bit of my personality as well as my research into my lectures, just to have the students understand where I'm coming from and not just the subjects I teach, but I do other things that are beyond what they see in their lectures. And then I try to encourage students to do research as well outside their studies in undergraduate. And I feel that makes a difference too. How easy it is to get to find people that are working in research capacity in your university. Who gets to do PhD level research in your university, and is there a bias there as well?
Yeah, so I was an academic in South Africa at the University of Cape Town, and there typically our students were funded. We had funding for them, and in fact, many colleagues wouldn't accept a student if they didn't have funding to support them. So there you had students who were 100% dedicated to the project, their PhD project or their master's project. And that was great because, you find they go deep into the subject and they know the subject really well. And you publish with them and so on. When I came back to Kenya, it was a whole different ball game. Here, the master's students almost always are working. They are older students. They're not your 25-year-old, they're actually older. They have families, they have full-time jobs. Yes, typically, yes. And so they're not doing your project full-time. So it's difficult. It's difficult because sometimes they disappear. So we have our master's programs are usually coursework and then the thesis. And when it reaches that thesis stage, they vanish because they just don't have the time. But even the ones that do the project on time all the way to the end, there's a lack of depth you find, that you were used to when you were somewhere else. So that is a challenge. And the PhD is the same thing, that you don't get that depth of investigation, that depth of curiosity that you would get if the student was doing that full time. So they're not funded typically, but yeah, so that is a very different environment altogether.
Yeah, and it does affect how you approach your own research as well. The way I navigate this a little bit on my side is to collaborate with other researchers in other institutions. The workload is divided across the different members of the research group depending on their availability, expertise, skills. Do you also do that? And how do you find, sometimes it's a challenge to find that group of people to work with as well. What factors play in when you are building those collaboration groups?
So it's very true that um, you don't have all this whole army of students writing papers with you. You have to write them yourself for the most part. And so then you end up not being as prolific as your colleagues in some other country, some other, prestigious institution. Once in a while you produce a paper. So yes, that is absolutely the case here, that a lot of the work you do it yourself. Also, there's just not an abundance of funding. We don't have these large grants. We just don't have them. I've received some grants, but they're not big. So, you find that you have to work on small projects. You're not as prolific in your publishing. And yeah, you just have to keep your ambitions small. You're not going to expect to write as many papers as someone at Stanford is writing because you just don't have the resources. And even the work that you do is limited because also we are teaching a lot. You don't get that break where this semester you're just doing research. No, that doesn't happen. You still have to do your full load, 3 courses per semester, and still do research. So there are challenges there, that we have to navigate. And then when it comes to finding other people to work with, I've been able to work with people. That comes with its own set of challenges. People can be difficult. And so I've found it doesn't mean that when you find the people, everything's great. You also have a new set of challenges, personalities.
It does take many attempts to find that group of people that you can be productive with. Definitely. I empathize and I relate so much. And you mentioned you do have a teaching load, and I imagine it's um, big cohorts as well, or is it smaller classes, or do you do large classes?
I have maybe 25 students in a class, 30. But sometimes I have taught 80 students. You teach, you set the assignments, you mark them, you do the quizzes, everything. When I first came back to Kenya, it was a culture shock, but now I'm used to it. I quite like it.
Amazing. And I'm all the more amazed that you find time for community involvement and leadership. What motivates you to found and lead the Nairobi ACM-W chapter?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a story there. It's just that I didn't actually set out to do that. I didn't say, let's start a chapter that's going to be very important. It actually was that, so we had this celebration of women in computing in 2022, and a colleague invited me into the organizing committee. So that's how it started. And so that first edition of Celebration of Women in Computing in Africa was hosted by a university in Nigeria. So I was just coming in as somebody who's been invited. In fact, they'd already been meeting for like half a year and so on. So I was invited to the team. I put my whole into everything I do. Okay, if I'm not doing all of it, I'm not doing any of it. So I threw myself into that role. I eventually became the co-chair for East Africa because we do an Africa-wide celebration. So we had a chair for East Africa. So Nigeria is in West Africa. So we had the chair from there, and then the chair for the co-chair for East Africa and a co-chair for South Africa. Those are the people who are in the team. And then, of course, we had all the other chairs, the poster chair and all of that. So these celebrations are led by the steering committee, the Europeans, the ACM-W chair, the global chairs. So I'm sure you know these people, Ruth Lennon, Rukia and Dorota. So Ruth Lennon and Rukia were the ones who were leading that effort, the first edition. And they told us, it's good to have chapters. It's good to have. So there was a chapter in Nigeria. I don't know if it pre-existed the celebration or it started during the celebration. But so the following year, when we were hosting it in Kenya, I was, it was the same thing. We encourage you to have a chapter. So that's how it started. Yes, that is how it started. So that year, which was 2024, had celebration was one activity. And of course, we had lots of meetings to plan that. So yeah, so that is how we came to have a chapter. It is a bit of a challenge now because I wanted to hand over to a new chair, but actually no one was willing to take the role because last year we were a year old. And I was keen to hand over the reins to someone else. People are so busy, actually. So that has been the challenge, is to get someone to take over. And I'm so stretched myself that I feel like I'm failing in the role, to be honest. I feel like I'm not doing like we're not having as many activities. We did have a great activity last year where we went to a girls' high school, and they just loved our visit. They had so many questions about STEM careers, and we brought them some gifts. We bought some just notebooks and pens, and they were so happy to have us. So, I think there's a lot we can do. Nairobi, there are many schools like that, girls' schools, high schools that we can visit, and it's something that we enjoy doing. But I just can't seem to find the time to organize even just a meeting of the team. Yeah, I feel a little bit guilty about that. I know we have a year to do something, so we will definitely do something.
We hear this a lot actually when we talk about the barriers and the challenges to sustain a chapter and sustain an event and a celebration. How sometimes the work is unevenly distributed and sometimes there are leadership gaps as well. The same person is always having to do the role, for example. They agree that sometimes it becomes central to a person rather than a community. And one of the barriers is to raise the next leaders, basically.
I think part of the problem here is that the ACM is not that well known. So, yes, I think that people, don't think that is a great thing in your CV. So I think that's part of the problem is people are not aware of it and they don't really know what it is. They don't think it's important for them to participate in the ACM.
Again, this is spot on. I think ACM's presence in regions do automatically affect ACM-W communities as well. Could ACM or ACM-W do better in the region to improve on this? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I think the ACM itself lacks a presence here. So there are rarely any conferences, ACM conferences in Africa. If they're there, they'll be in South Africa. But even there, it's just once in a while. So that is part of the reason why it's so unknown. And I think if the ACM made that effort, it would really help us. The other thing is that in Africa, especially here in Kenya, they don't recognize conference publications as being as valuable as journal papers. And so I've explained until I'm tired of explaining that in computer science, it's different. We mostly publish at conferences. Actually, some of them are more difficult to get into than journals, but yeah, so that is, that hurdle is there. And I think if prestigious organizations like the ACM and IEEE, if they were holding conferences here, I think begin to emerge and people begin to understand that for computer science, for engineering, this is the primary venue for publication. At the University of Cape Town, it was the same thing. Our Department of Computer Science was in the Faculty of Science. And it was the same thing because we had biologists and physicists who consider conferences to be nothing. You write an abstract over the weekend and then you submit it and then you go and present. And we fought very hard, and actually they accepted in the end that for us in computer science, the conference papers are just as valuable, and people were now getting promoted with their conference papers. So, but I left there and came to Kenya and found the same problem.
You have to fight again. So getting tiring to fight the same fights over and over.
Yes, it does get tiring.
ACM presence and ACM-W presence is building a community across Africa. The celebration is such a magnificent event. When I read your chapter highlight, I found it truly significant to the participants and a truly enjoyable experience as well. So when you reflect on 2024 and the celebration, what do you remember? What stands out to you most as the most enjoyable parts? What would you like to repeat in the next one?
Yeah, so maybe I can just go back to the one from 2022, which was a great success. I think it was only online, and we had the Africa-wide, aspect to it. So there was me here and other people in Kenya, and then of course Nigeria and South Africa, and people all over the continent. So that was wonderful, and it was well attended. I think we had over 100 attendees even from the UK and the US. Africans were there, and just other people as well. It doesn't have to be Africans. I think we had a much better event than we did in 2024. 2024, I had so many challenges. This goes wrong and that goes wrong. That other thing goes wrong. The final thing that went wrong was that the government declared a holiday on the day that we were going to hold our event. So that meant that the students weren't going to be in school unless they just chose to. And so attendance was really affected by that. It was not an established holiday. It was just called the night before. And we even now had a big discussion with the people that, for example, the caterer. I called her and said, what's going to happen? And she told me she was catering multiple events. And she said, they're going to go on. You know what? Let's just have it. And we did. And it was more successful than I thought. We had a good number, maybe 30 people physically. And then online, we had another maybe 60 people. So we had an event, and it was really well received by the ones who were able to attend. So in spite of everything, we overcame all these challenges and had a good event after all.
I didn't know that final challenge. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I can't imagine how I would have reacted to having learned this last minute when you plan all that. You've done an amazing job. And if you consider the number of participants in total, it's not very different than 2022, which you remember as a success. But I think this one, having 30 people physically on a day when it was supposed to be a holiday, it's an amazing achievement. And it shows dedication also of those people who came and showed up and participated and contributed. So it's great. But what do you think? Do you think online events are more uniting, allowing more people to participate?
I think the best way is to have a hybrid event, because there are certain things you can do physically that you just can't do online. Just physically meeting people, and at lunchtime, you're talking to people, you're discovering they're working on the same thing that you are, you form connections. I think online is just a very impoverished version of that. Yes, you can make connections, but I think that ideally you should have that face-to-face, and then to give it more reach, then you have that online component.
So for the next iteration of the ACM celebration of women in computing in Africa, do you plan to do online or do you plan a hybrid?
Yeah, so I came on board after a few months after they started meeting, and I think they've planned for physical events only. That's what I've heard them say.
Okay, so we're looking forward to that as well. Let's see what happens. There's a lot of labor going into this, and you already mentioned the organizational challenges, but there's also emotional labor put into these events because I've heard you when you said when I do something, I throw myself at it. I'm enrolled 100%. So not only there is time and organizational kind of labor that goes into it, but also your own emotional investment goes into it as well. So thank you for
Absolutely. Yeah.
bringing it up. I think people don't realize how much investment it requires from the volunteers to run these community events. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. It's very rewarding. Once you've done the event, you just feel proud.
You've already mentioned that it's hard to find continuity in leadership, and there must be challenges in balancing academic life and community leadership. What do you think could be done better in terms of leadership models? Do you think any other alternative model could help a little bit to get people more into leadership?
Yeah, so I haven't thought about how to solve the problem, but I do know, for example, when we visited the high school, that wasn't my idea. It was the idea of one of the team members, and it was a great success. But I probably can't get her to be the chair. Yes, so people do want to do things. When they hear chair, they just see this big role with huge responsibilities. And yeah, so I think that's where the challenge is. Um, yeah, and so I'm not sure really how to overcome that. But I also think that this separation of student chapter from a professional chapter, I think that could be harming us because I think the younger women have more energy and they have more time and they would be excited to serve in these roles. But you see, the way it's organized, the way it's, set up, they have to have their own chapter. So I would love to hand over to a student, and I think there would be one that, or more than one, that would be willing to lead.
One might consider a joint professional and student chapter with two different representatives co-leading, and then it would allow better synergy between the professional and the student chapters as well, and it wouldn't look so much like an overwhelming role. I also thought sometimes we don't realize we are ready for the role and we make it a big thing in our heads. And leadership training sometimes makes people realize that they're not that far away from those positions or they shouldn't hesitate to take them on. The example you given, suggesting an initiative and kind of leading the way to deliver that is already a sign of good leadership. But people tend to not sometimes realize that they have it in themselves, right?
Absolutely.
So I was wondering whether training events around women's leadership or coaching, would that work?
I think so. I think those would be good programs or good initiatives that probably would be very welcome with everyone. So yes, I think that's a good idea.
Embedded maybe to the programs of the celebrations across globally, like those little training programs.
Absolutely.
I always like to think part ACMW is part of a wider ecosystem of partnerships, like in different regions, different groups basically do different activities, and we kind of try to see through those partnerships whether a shared story, a global community emerges. And you've already mentioned that with Ruth and Rukia's involvement, you started this celebration. What kind of other support would help from ACMW to grow and make this partnership even stronger?
I think if there are seminars, of course, there'll be virtual seminars that we circulate, we announce them, and we have students and faculty join those. I think that would publicize the ACM and make it better known. So I'm not talking about our own local seminars. I'm talking about seminars that are organized by the ACM. I know they have those, but like there needs to be some conversation about, like making them part of our like program here. So for example, our ACM chapter could just say every month we are all attending this online webinar that is being organized by the ACM. So I think that might help.
And that's a wonderful idea. It would be nice to have a conversation globally around the emerging topics in computing and from a gender angle as well. There are a lot of opportunities we can create together. So as we slowly getting to close, can you to tell us if you wish someone had told you earlier in your career how to build a better sense of a home in computing, like belonging in computing, what would you tell them?
Oh, okay. So I needed a lot of practical help. There were just a ton of struggles when I was studying in the US. What women can do for younger women is really provide practical help and just allowing the younger women to have that confidence to approach you and ask for the help that they need.
Thank you so much with me a lot. I'm the first PhD in a technical subject in my family. I lacked practical guidance about how to find an advisor, how to find a topic, how to navigate a very different institution.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's very important for people, especially not coming. And this is typical in women, typically, where you're not nurtured into a career. And if you're there, you probably fought a lot of obstacles to be there. How to give them a little bit more practical um, advice so that they know how to navigate some of these challenges, which seem, oh, you should be able to do this, but it's not so clear cut.
Yeah, no, it's not an exact science.
No. Yeah, I think we build a mentor. We need champions.
Yeah, absolutely. Allies. The first ACM celebration of women computing that I attended was in San Diego. And my PhD supervisor sent me there. She paid for me to go there. And that was in 2005. I want to thank her. I don't know if she'll ever see this, but I just want to thank her for that experience.
It does change a lot of things. It sounds like a gesture, a small gesture, but it's a huge it does have a huge impact on somebody's life. We've been reading from our scholars getting the chance to go to their first conference to present a poster or a paper, and they mention they changed their mind about PhD, for example. They realized PhD doesn't mean that you have to have a certain background or certain economic status, that they can do it as well. So it is quite important, isn't it? To give people the chance to see beyond a little bit, the wider community.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for this. Audrey, this was thank you so much for this generous and thoughtful conversation. It just reminds us that community and belonging in technical spaces, they don't happen by accident. They are built and sustained and cared by people like you who choose to show up and work tirelessly, giving 100% of themselves.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Voices of ACM-W, stories behind our work. Find more conversations at women.acm.org. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram.